Amanda Stoker, who joins us live from Brisbane. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
No problem. Hi, Chris.
Look, I want to get into some of the political issues around the place in a moment, but first up, I just wanted to give viewers a little bit of an insight into your background. I know you've appeared on Andrew Bolt's show and Paul Murray's show, and people have been impressed with your straight-talking approach. You're relatively young and you're a lawyer. When and why did you decide to get into politics?
Yeah, I was practising at the bar and I'd had a career as a prosecutor before that. And look, I loved it, all was going well, but I had some frustrations about how some of the policies and some of the issues that were being talked about most in this country seemed to be going, and I felt like what was on the agenda didn't really speak to me. And so I thought I wasn't alone, and I decided to put my hand up and do something about it, much better than sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's one thing to get involved in politics and in a political party to be engaged in that debate, but it's quite another thing to actually put your name up for a seat, in this case taking up a vacancy in the Senate. How trepidatious were you about that life, heading to Canberra and surrendering yourself to politics in that way?
Oh, look, it's not the easy life. I'm the first person to say that. You know, you work very hard, you put yourself out there, and you're not going to please everybody. In my case, you know, it's a lot of time away from a family I love and young kids, and that's a huge sacrifice. But ultimately, I want to leave a country for my three girls that I believe is on the right path, and that is taking action where it should be taking action, that's upholding values that I think are important for the long term. And I didn't see it happening, so someone's got to do something about it. Yeah, might as well be me.
It might as well be you, and good on you for doing it. I mean, this is the point about federal politics. It is so tough on families. Now, I know a lot of jobs are tough on families. There's people watching this show now who do shift work, who are fly-in, fly-out workers, and they're away from their families a lot. But these family pressures must be one of the factors, don't you think, that there aren't enough women putting up their hand from the coalition side of politics, at least, to go into federal politics?
Look, I think it's definitely a factor. When you take a set of values that underpin our party's beliefs that say family's really important and that parents need to take responsibility for raising their kids and things like that, there aren't too many people who then say, OK, I'm happy to be away for more than half the year from the kids I want to make sure turn out OK. So it's definitely a part of the reason why we have women who come to politics much later than you do on, say, the Labor side of things.
Yeah, it is such a great thing for parents, male or female. Of course, most of us, I suppose, end up being parents, but it's certainly great that to have that perspective. And as you say, even if that means you get into politics early and out, or come in later, male or female, it's flexibility there is the key. Just on that, though...
Can I say something? Yep. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
No,
I was just going to say, there's something really important I think that we shouldn't lose in this. When I went through my pre-selection, there were a lot of people who found it, you know, a big thing for them to give a vote to somebody who was a youngish female with kids. It was a big step for them, particularly if they were quite conservative people. But I'm of the view that if you want your political life, you know, that what's happening in our parliaments to reflect the needs of normal families, well, you need a few people at least in the parliament who are living the life of a normal family, you know, who are married with 3 kids, or who are, you know, a double income family working the kind of life that normal Australians are. And if you look around what Parliament's made up of, you see a lot of single people, you know, a lot of people who are without kids, and that's just not necessarily going to bring out the issues that are relevant to normal people.
I could not agree more. And the other point on that too is that there are many fathers with young families in federal politics who really feel those pressures and talk about them quietly to their friends, and the media perhaps doesn't focus so much on that, but it's obviously an issue for fathers as well. And in the end, it's up to the politicians, the families, the people themselves to make their own judgments about balancing all those pressures, surely.
And I'm the first person to say, you know, I couldn't do this without the most amazing husband out there. You know, Adam's a champ. He does so much. And it's just like that for the males who are serving in Parliament, who've got women at home really, you know, carrying the load.
Indeed. Now, just on the women in politics on the coalition side, we saw all those claims after the leadership change where Julia Banks and others were claiming there's bullying and sexist bullying in the coalition. It all seems to have run into the sand. Nobody's come out with any specific names or examples. What happened there? Is there a problem with this in the coalition in your experience or not?
Look, the fact that there were ultimately no complaints made, no names named, no specific complaints particularised, I think speaks volumes. I never observed any problems with bullying, and you'd think that as the new girl in the building, if someone was going to get pushed around, it might have been me. But I didn't see any sign of it. I also think it's really disingenuous for particularly women in our party to complain about, you know, having difficult conversations, because when you do that and you know, your male colleagues start to think they've got to be concerned about whether or not they're going to face a bullying allegation if they come and have a chat with you, women get cut out of the conversations that matter, which means they don't have the relationships they need to be able to progress when it's time for promotion. So it means you'll have down the track the problem of not enough women in cabinet, even if you can deal with the problem at entry level. So I think we need to be very serious about this and say, look, if you're a big enough person, male or female, to go into the parliament and fight for your community, fight for people who are doing it tough in your neighbourhood, then you've also got to be tough enough to have difficult conversations with your colleagues when they crop up.
Yeah, indeed. Now, you mentioned, you talked before about deciding to put up your hand and get involved in politics because of your frustrations with some of the things going on in this country. What are those issues? What are the driving issues for you, the things that drive you, the things where you want to make a difference in your parliamentary career?
When I was a kid, I grew up during, you remember the recession we had to have back in the 80s?
Indeed, I almost lost a house during it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I grew up in a family that was in the same situation. You know, my parents had a small business in plumbing, drainage and gas fitting. They had, you know, builders go under time and time again, and I saw them struggle to keep it together despite the fact that they were working really, really hard. And I compared that to how they did exactly the same thing during the Howard years, and they prospered. So I think, first and foremost, we've got to make sure that we've got government in this country that means that people who back themselves, who work hard, who you know, put everything into getting ahead, are rewarded for that. Reward for effort should be core of all of this. And I found it really problematic that there was a narrative coming out, particularly from the Labor side of things, that was all about class envy, all about tearing down people who were succeeding, and I thought that was really problematic, and it fed into other cultural concerns that I had. You know, I started to see this emphasis on political correctness, this denial of common sense in a lot of our social and cultural kind of debates in a way that I thought was just bananas. And I'd start to think, you know, am I the only person going crazy in this country, or is the world going crazy around me? And, you know, the more I looked into it, the more I started talking with people, I saw there was work to do to see the value of, you know, traditional ways of thinking and the fundamentals of Western civilization and the value of free speech and free intellectual contest. All of those things that are the core of what made us great were under fire, and I really want to fight for them.
There are a lot of challenges in daily life for any person, for any company, for any community. There's all sorts of things go wrong and all sorts of things that need to be done. But there seems to be a propensity now for whatever the problem is, there must be some level of government offers a solution, whether it's local government, state government or federal government. Isn't the problem now that we just have far too much government and we need to find a way to wind it back?
I think that's a huge part of the problem. Now, every time there's a problem that arises, we don't, as a culture, look to ourselves or to our neighbours or to our families to try and work up a solution in the way that, you know, the frontier Australian society did. We straight away jump to, well, that's a thing for government to do. I need the government to fix that. Now, that has a couple of problems that come from it. One is that it means that the size of government and the cost of government gets bigger and bigger and less sustainable. But it also, I think, gives us a kind of a strength or a spiritual deficit. When we, for instance, outsource all of the problems that arise around a family and the difficult things that can confront us associated with ageing or health or, you know, or childcare, for instance, when we ask government to do all of those things for us, we deny ourselves the opportunity to build strength in our communities and strength in our families and the kinds of bonds that make life matter, you know, the kinds of bonds that make life great. And I think that is a part of the reason, that big government attitude is part of the reason why so many of our social problems seem intractable at the moment.
We've lost our sense of self-reliance. We were once a self-reliant country.
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's a hell of a problem. I think the difficulty, though, is to actually start winding back. It's easy to identify that as a problem, but you must know from outside looking in how difficult it is for government to cut any program, to cut any spending. Now, you're speaking freely now as a backbencher. What are your ambitions?
Look, I'll see where it goes. I'm challenged enough by what's going on at the moment, and I'm really enjoying the ability to be able to put what I think are some new or challenging ideas into the system and try and use those to prompt my colleagues to go in a direction that I think is a worthwhile one. And we'll see what happens. Who knows? Life's long.
Have you been surprised by how much support you've got from members of the public in your political career so far, given you are just a backbencher? And what do you put it down to?
Oh, look, I have been really touched by how encouraging people have been and how warm at least some parts of the community have been in, welcoming me to the scene, I suppose. But maybe that's just because I don't necessarily just speak from the talking points. I try and say what I mean, and I hope that's a strength.
You seem to have hit the nail on the head there. I was going to say, I mean, my observation is simply that you are a straight talker. You've been talking a lot of sense, and you've been doing it straight from the heart, and we're so used to people running political lines. The trouble is, as your political career progresses, how long you can maintain that purity.
Look, I like to think that having 3 kids at home that make a whole lot of mess and puke on you regularly is pretty grounding. Make sure it brings you back down to earth if your head starts to blow up. But I also hope that by the time any of that might be on the horizon for me, I might have helped to shape a Liberal National Party that is much more centred in what it stands for, and so it's unashamed about being straight about these issues. So if I've had the influence I hope to have, maybe it won't be an issue.
Thanks so much for joining us, Senator. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Senator Amanda